Hey there, welcome to the Mid-Unit 5 review. Here I'm going to do everything on the we do side, and you take care of everything on the I do side. The first number, define and give an example of a real solution, rational, irrational, imaginary. So a real solution is where is any positive or negative x-intercept. And a rational solution is largely the same thing, except for something to be a rational number, it needs to be able to be expressed as a fraction. So like if it's a whole number, 5 over 1, 5, that can be written as 5 over 1, or like negative 25, that's negative 25 over 1. Or if it's like a decimal, like 2.5, that's 5 over 2. So it's any x-intercept that can be expressed as a fraction. So yeah, any positive or negative x-intercept that can be written as a fraction. And an irrational solution would be the opposite of rational. So it cannot be rewritten as a fraction. So look for things like that have square roots in them, like a square root of 2, or square root of 7, something like that. So yeah, any x-intercept that can't be written as a fraction. So example, I wrote square root of 2. And then an imaginary solution would be where it's not actually touching the x-axis and has a negative inside a square root. So yeah, that's what I said for that. Parabola is not touching the x-axis. There's a negative inside a square root. Okay, so get to know those definitions. Honestly, on the I do side, I just said write down your answers again so you don't forget them. So yeah. So number 2, solve. I am going to, you can solve using whatever method you want. I'm just going to be consistent. I'm just going to use the quadratic formula over and over again. So here is the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So it needs to, you need to have everything on one side, so a minus 2 over. And so I have x squared plus 8x minus 2 equals 0, nothing combines. And so here I have an a of 1, and b is 8, and c is negative 2. So now I just plug in everything into the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, so negative 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 8 squared minus 4 times a is 1 times c is negative 2. All that is over 2 times 1, 2a. All right, so this is where I like to simplify this. This is 64 minus 4 times negative 2, so that's plus 8. So that will be square root of 72. So I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 72 all over 2a would just be 2. And then how would you simplify the square root of 72? 72 is 36 times 2. And the square root of 36 is 6, right? So before I go too fast, I'll say this. I'll split it up, 36 times 2 over 2. And then I'm going to say the square root of 36 is 6, so I have negative 8 plus or minus 6 square root 2 over 2. And then both of these can divide by 2. Negative 8 over 2 would be negative 4. And then 6 over 2 would be 3. So negative 4 plus 3 square root 2 would be the answer for number 1. Number 2, I have an a value of 1, a b value of negative 2, and a c value of 10. All right, so plug everything into the formula. We have x equals negative b, and it was already negative, so negative 2 turns into positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, make sure you use parentheses, minus 4 times a is 1 and c is 10. All that's under the square root over 2a, so 2 times 1. And so I have x equals 2 plus or minus, and then we got negative 2 squared, that's 4, minus 4 times 10 is minus 40, so you have 4 minus 40, that's negative 36. So the square root of negative 36 over 2 times 1, that's 2. So the square root of negative 36 would be 6i. So I'm going to write x equals 2 plus or minus 6i over 2. And like the last one, they can both divide by 2. And so I'm going to say x equals, let's say 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So I'm going to say 1 plus or minus 3i for my answer to number 2. So moving on to number 4 and 5, don't worry about writing plus or minus. Anytime you do the square root on a problem like this, don't worry about the plus or minus. The square root of negative 16, that would be just 4i. Because, square root of 16 is 4, so since it's negative, put an I by it. Square root of negative 64 is 8i. So, yeah, if you had the plus or minus by this, it would be kind of confusing. But if you just do 4i plus 8i, that would just be 12i. So that's what it means by simplify these. So I'll apply the same kind of logic for number 5. And I have the square root of negative 4, that's 2i. Minus 3 times the square root of negative 25, that's 5i. And 3 times 5 is 15. So I have 2i minus 15i. And then 2i minus 15i is just negative 13i. And that's the final answer to number 5. All right? Number 6, it is 8 minus 2i squared. So this is the most common mistake people make. They just do 8 squared minus, and then they do 2i squared. All right? Don't do that. When you're squaring something in parentheses, you need to write out the parentheses twice, because that's what it means. It means 8 minus 2i times 8 minus 2i. All right? So when you distribute, you'll get 4 terms, whereas if you just squared those 2 terms, you just get 2 terms. So what is 8 times 8? That's 64. What is 8 times negative 2i? That's negative 16i. What is negative 2i times 8? That's negative 16i again. And what is negative 2i times negative 2i? That's going to be positive 4i squared. So let's combine our like terms in the middle. Negative 16i minus 16i is negative 32i. And 4i squared turns into 4 times negative 1, because the definition of I is the square root of negative 1. So I squared would be the square root of negative 1 squared, meaning just negative 1. And so bring down the 64. And so 4 times negative 1 makes negative 4. And so I'm just going to bring everything else down. 64 minus 32i minus 4. So do 64 minus 4, because those are like terms. 64 minus 4 is 60 minus 32i for my final answer. Moving on to number 7. It just says simplify, and you're adding. Plus signs never change any signs. So if you distributed a plus sign because you have parentheses, it doesn't change anything. So the parentheses are basically there to try and distract you. But yeah, just combine like terms. What's negative 4 plus 9? That's 5. What's 6i minus 2i? That's 4i, so plus 4i. That's all there is to say about number 7. Number 8, distribute. What's 9i times 6? That's 54i. What's 9i times 5i? That's 45i squared. And then remember, I squared turns into negative 1. So, oh, I forgot to write the I there. So bring down the 54i. And then for some reason, it's not written in standard form unless you write the regular number first. So 45 times negative 1 is negative 45 plus 54i, that comes second. So the I term has to come second, and the regular number comes first. Number 9, distribute the negative. So this is where parentheses do matter. So you have 2 minus 8i, and then two negatives make a positive, so plus 9, and then minus 3i. And then combine like terms. What's 2 plus 9? That's 11. What's negative 8i minus 3i? That's negative 11i. And then it doesn't become I squared unless it's multiplying. So yeah, I just said negative 8i minus 3i, so that's negative 11i. And so that's all there is to say about number 9. Number 10, solve for the roots in a plus bi form. That just tells me that I'm going to have an imaginary answer. So I'm going to go back to using the quadratic formula here. Here I'm going to plug in 2 for a, 6 for b, and 9 for c. And so the formula starts off with x equals negative b, so negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4ac, so minus 4 times a is 2, and c is 9, all over 2a, so 2 times 2. All right, so let's simplify this, what's inside the radical. 6 squared is 36, minus 4 times 2 is negative 8, times 9 is a negative 72, so 36 minus 72 is negative 36, so I'm going to write x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 36 over 2 times 2 is 4. All right, so what does negative 36 turn into? The square root of that would make 6i. Right, because the square root of 36 is 6, and so since it's negative, it has an I by it. And so you'll notice that both of these are 6's, so 6 over 4 simplifies to 3 over 2. So I can simplify both of these. So I'm going to say for the final answer, x equals negative 3 plus or minus 3i all over 2. Because that would be the simplified fraction. Negative 6 over 4 is negative 3 over 2. 6i over 4 is 3i over 2. All right, so yeah, that would be the final answer to number 10. Number 11, solve for x. So here I'm going to use the quadratic formula again. I'm going to plug in 6 for a. I'm going to plug in 2 for b and 5 for c. So x equals negative b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 6 times c is 5. All that's over 2a, so 2 times 6. So the next step is to simplify this. 6 squared is, oh, it shouldn't say 6 squared because it's b squared, right? So I wrote 6 because that was the a, but b squared is 2 squared. There we go. So I have 2 squared, that's 4, minus 4 times 6 times 5, that's minus 120. So that's negative 116. So I have x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 116. And then 2 times 6 is 12. So we need to simplify negative 116. That does simplify. I would start dividing it by numbers that are perfect squares. So like divided by 25, divided by 16, divided by 9, divided by 4, and then you get a number. So this is going to turn into negative 2 plus or minus negative 116 divided by 4 is 29. So I'm going to write negative 4 times 29. All that's over 12. All right. So that's how you would simplify the square root of negative 116. So then the square root of negative 4 is 2i. So I have negative 2 plus or minus 2i square root 29. All that over 12. And then can you simplify the fraction? 2 over 12. Both of these are 2 over 12. So that would simplify to 1 over 6, right? So my final answer would be x equals negative 1 plus or minus 1i square root of 29 over 6. All right. Again, I got the negative 1 over 6 from doing negative 2 over 12, negative 1 over 6. And 2i divided by 12, that would be like 1i over 6 if you were to like cut it down. Okay? So that's number 11. Number 12, find the roots. So do the quadratic formula. So I have an a value of 1, I have 1x squared, a b value of 4, and a c value of 2. So x equals negative b, so negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 4 squared minus 4ac, so a is 1, c is 2, all over 2a, so 2 times 1. So this is 16. 4 times 1 is negative 4, times 2 is negative 8, so 16 minus 8 is 8. So I have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 8 over 2 times 1 is 2. So simplify the square root of 8. I know that 8 is 4 times 2. So I'm going to write the square root of 4 times the square root of 2 over 2. And so what does the square root of 4 make? That makes a 2. So I have negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 2. So long story short, the square root of 8 is 2 square root 2. All that's over 2. And then you can simplify your fraction, right? Negative 4 over 2 is negative 2. And then 2 square root 2 divided by 2, the 2's would cancel out, leaving behind just a square root 2. So x is going to equal negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. And that is the final answer right there. So I just want to point out that if you were to graph this, how would you be able to tell that the answer is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2? Well, you know, if everything's on one side, you can graph it. You don't graph the equals 0 part, but you calculate the zeros. So in the TI Inspire, that's menu 6-1. And so I get these two numbers here. So how you would know they're the same thing is if you actually type this in, you'll get these numbers. So typing in negative 2 plus the square root of 2, that's going to get you a value of about, that's going to get you that negative 0.586. And then typing in negative 2 minus the square root of 2, that'll get you the other value of about negative 3.414. So if you're ever using the calculator to check your work or whatever, but the answer is phrased like this, then you would just have to type it in, you know, type 1 in with the plus and type 1 in with the minus and match it up with what you got for your roots. Other than that, thank you for watching and goodbye.